Two women say their lives were disastrously altered by an encounter with an unidentified craft, and the UFO community was the only place they could turn to for help. Betty Cash owned a cafe in Dayton, a small town 40 miles north of Houston, Texas. Her friend, Vickie Landrum, worked with her as a waitress. At 7 p.m. on December 29, 1980, the two women drove to a church in New Caney, Texas, with Vickie's 6-year-old grandson Colby for a bingo game. When they discovered that the game had been canceled, the three headed home at about 9 p.m.
We started back out of New Caney into Dayton. All of a sudden, Colby looked up and he said, "Grandma, what's that bright light?" It was where I could not even see the middle of the highway because the light was so bright. And Vickie screamed for me to turn. She said, "Betty, it's coming right at us, stop."
And it had been raining, so we couldn't get off the road and turn around and go back. So we just had to stop. I got out on the passenger side, holding Colby, and Betty walked to the front of the car and stood there looking up. And I was screaming for her to get back in the car because I was afraid she was going to get burned up.
The three had stumbled onto what appeared to be an aircraft in distress. The vehicle sent down a stream of heat and flame onto the asphalt and the occupants of the car.
It was a diamond-shaped thing. I mean, it was similar to this, and there was flames coming out of the bottom of it. My curiosity's bad, and I was going to try to find out what it was. The light was so bright, it was blinding me. And I was standing there trying to find out everything I could. And so Vickie kept screaming for me to get back in the car, that we were all going to burn to death. I just grabbed the door handle, and when I did, it just pulled all the meat off of my hand.
Flames from the craft had heated the automobile's exterior to scalding levels, burning Betty when she opened the door. Once inside, she turned on the air conditioner to try and cool the car, which had become unbearably hot. Terrified, they watched the craft struggle to regain flight for what they estimated was nearly 10 minutes. When it finally raised above the road, Betty Cash drove her car away from the scene.
It kept going up and coming down. And so finally it went slowly up, and it moved slowly, not flew away, slowly toward Houston. And just as it began pulling away, we began seeing helicopters. And they wasn't the little bitty kind. They were the kind they used to parachute people out.
I counted 23. Vickie said she counted, I think it's 21. But we were all so excited and terrified, we didn't know what to do. They were chasing the object. They didn't even let on like they knew that we were down there. So they were going in the same direction the object was. And they were losing no time getting there.
Betty Cash frantically drove away to escape the craft as Vickie Landrum tried to console her grandson. But as they raced down the rural highway, they kept crossing paths with the strange caravan.
We drove about 8 miles. There was a whole bunch of helicopters that were flying in with their searchlights on. They flew over us, and they were the big kind.
Betty Cash, though badly burned on her hand, neck, head, and chest, managed to drive the car home to Dayton. Vickie had burns on her face, Colby on his back. Dehydrated, the three consumed large amounts of water and told friends and families what had happened. Betty's 20-year-old son tried to convince her to go to a hospital to be checked out. When the local news carried nothing of the event, she decided to wait.
He begged me to go that night, and I told him what had happened. And I said, "Toby, if we go to a doctor, they'll think we're crazy." I said, "I've got to go on to bed." So I did. I went on to bed, and I was so sick all night, up chucking. The next morning I woke up, and there was big gobs of hair on my pillow. And I had blisters just all over my face.
For several days, the women refused medical attention, fearing they wouldn't be believed. When Betty's condition worsened, she relented, and all three went to the hospital.
And we didn't know we were hurt that bad. And when we did go to the hospital, the little boy told them that, because I told him I'd whip him, but the little boy said, "You can whip me now, but I'm going to tell the doctor what happened to us."
Doctors were baffled at the source of the strange burns to Colby, Vickie Landrum, and the most severely injured of the three, Betty Cash.
The illness that she suffered 3 weeks after her exposure was an absolute classic radiation injury. And she lost skin, she lost hair on the exposed side. She then had diarrhea, vomiting, and all the illnesses you get, and it was exactly on time. I don't think she would have made it up. And the other thing is, I don't think that she could have made it up because she didn't know it, and she's precisely on time for describing what would be a 2-gray to 3-gray radiation exposure.
They kept asking me, how did I get burned? But I didn't have any earthly idea that the object was a probability of radiation. All I knew at that time was radiation was used for cancer.
Betty remained hospitalized for over a month with her injuries. After her release, she could no longer work and was forced to close her restaurant.
She has suffered only losses from the very beginning. She was economically devastated by the illness that she had after she was radiated. I've been giving her medication for years to try to help her out through all this. Later, she did get breast cancer and had mastectomies as well. All of this, she was uninsured. No one was going to insure her in the early 80s for any price, probably.
Vickie Landrum and Colby's injuries, though not as severe, left them with lifelong skin and eye troubles. Desperate, the women wrote to Senator Lloyd Benston and Congressman Charles Wilson to ask for medical help and answers.
I had received the letters back from Lloyd Benson and Charles Wilson telling us to go as soon as we were able to go, that Bergstrom Air Force Base knew all about it and they'd be glad to help us in any way that they possibly could.
They said there'd be doctors up there that could help us. And we went up there, and they treated us very dirty.
Officials at Bergstrom Air Force Base told them they knew nothing of the incident and informed them their only recourse was to try and sue the United States government for damages. Strangely, however, the military repeatedly attempted to purchase Betty Cash's vehicle, but she refused. As word of the incident spread around Dayton, Betty and Vickie felt ostracized by their neighbors. A minister offered to come to Vickie Landrum's home and pray with her alone, but she refused. It was then that the women turned to the UFO community for help. Betty Cash and Vickie Landrum have been ridiculed and ignored since their alleged 1980 encounter with an aircraft. But the UFO community refuses to let the case die. John Schuessler is an aerospace engineer and deputy director of the Mutual UFO Network. MUFON, as it's called, is a worldwide organization of UFO believers who study and investigate sightings. The women contacted him several weeks after the incident. Schuessler was curious but skeptical until he met Betty Cash.
She took her wig off, and she had big patches of hair missing from her head. And that was so shocking, and I said to her, I said, look, something very serious happened to you. And if you're openly honest with me and give me the information I'm looking for, I'll stick with you to the very end. I said, I need to talk to the other people that were involved in this case. And so I called Vickie Landrum, and I talked to her and her grandson, Colby. We asked them, why did you just go home after this incident happened? And they said, well, you've got to understand what happened. They were, what you might say, healthy Texas stock people. When something happens, they tough it out. They don't just run for help. Mrs. Landrum said, we always tough it out. I never go to the doctor. I never go to the hospital. I don't take medicine. When I'm ill, I tough it out. And so that's kind of what happened in this case.
Convinced of their story, Schuessler agreed to look for answers.
Then we went out to the site where this happened. They had never been back. We took them out one at a time. They each one took us right to the very place, even though they'd never been back from that night, because they'd been too ill. And we walked through the scenario, and we timed it, and we understood what happened, and we looked at the roadway that was burned and the trees that were burned. And we saw the emotions in these people when they got back to the place. They just broke down, completely broke down, cried. And they were so frightened from it, they still didn't want to be there. And after that, we decided, well, we'll let them go home, and then we'll start walking the roadways.
Schuessler began to canvass the area for witnesses to the incident. His investigation revealed that a Dayton police officer and his wife saw military helicopters in the sky on the night of December 29, 1980.
We had other witnesses too, civilian witnesses, that weren't as alert about what helicopters are, but they could describe them with two rotors on them that made them very unique. And there was no one else but the military flew twin-rotor helicopters in 1980. We started asking for those kind of records from the military. We were just completely stonewalled, just like these people didn't exist and the information didn't exist. And so that started our quest for more information and a long, long, drawn-out investigation.
Through the Freedom of Information Act in 1982, Schuessler obtained what he feels is the smoking gun in the case: the official military report on the investigation into the women's claims, which called their story credible. With Schuessler's aid, the two women hired a lawyer.
To me, it seemed to be a truthful story. Yes, I've had people who try to, as the saying goes, strap a story on you. I don't believe they were doing that. And the evidence contradicted that too.
Nearly 6 years after the alleged incident, Betty Cash and Vickie Landrum believed they might finally get some relief. They filed suit with the U.S. Attorney's Office in Houston, and a preliminary hearing was set for August 1986.
Of course, the federal government denied they had any connection with anything like this, and we didn't have any way of proving that the federal government was involved. All we could prove is that women were injured. Who injured them? We couldn't prove it. And so the judge says, I'm dismissing the case.
Their hopes crushed, Betty Cash and Vickie Landrum eventually left Texas to escape the painful memories of their ordeal. 18 years after the original incident, after the tabloids and local press tired of their story, another UFO investigator still searched for the answers.
We're coming into Dayton, Texas. You know, there's a mystery here. I've done investigations, I've done undercover operations, I've been involved in homicide investigations, and there's hard evidence, there's eyewitness testimony. As an investigator, I believe that those answers are out there, and eventually we may be able to bring this mystery to a conclusion, show a picture of what transpired on December 29th, 1980.
Ken Storch is a police officer in suburban Denver, a member of the Mutual UFO Network, and a former U.S. Air Force sergeant. During his military service, Storch says he was forced to sign a document preventing him from discussing a UFO incident. His unwilling participation in an alleged government cover-up made him sympathetic to the experiences of Betty Cash and Vickie Landrum.
Betty Cash and Vickie Landrum and Colby came around that corner and were confronted with an unknown. There was an object that was brilliant, diamond-shaped, emitting a high intensity, they say a flame, light of some sort, a power source. According to Betty Cash and Vickie Landrum and John Schuessler, the craft, when it came down from the sky, irradiated an intense heat, causing the blacktop to bubble, melt, contaminating the surrounding area. This is a classic encounter, right? We're at ground zero where it happened. This is it right here.
John Schuessler visited the site 3 weeks after the incident and noticed changes made to the road.
We went back out a few weeks later and looked, and that section of road was dug up and replaced, completely replaced. We contacted all of the road agencies around, state, city, county, and all of them said, we haven't worked on the road. We found some witnesses that said they did see people working on the road, and the trucks that were hauling the stuff away were unmarked.
6 to 8 weeks later, the same crew came back in, tore it up again, and repaved it again, removing, in fact, digging down, removing 8 inches or 6 inches of surface in the process. And if you look closely in this section of between 150, 200 yards, you can see that there's concrete and asphalt, and the texture changes dramatically, and it's just in this one section. I mean, it's not like it's the whole roadway.
Storch notes that the changes made to the asphalt surface run parallel to a cluster of small trees lining the roadway.
There's young growth here that's just very, very young, and then the trees off in the distance here are probably 40, 50, maybe even older, but this lack of trees in this specific area, I think, indicates that they were removed. Why?
Investigators believe the U.S. military repaired the road to hide evidence of Betty Cash and Vickie Landrum's unexplained encounter.
I believe that there is evidence yet to be uncovered, and I truly, truly hope that by keeping this in the spotlight, by keeping the pressure on, that we'll be able to get those answers, to get that witness that will come forward and said, hey, I flew the helicopter, I was there. And I feel bad what happened to those 2 ladies.
I think it's very important for the civilian UFO groups to continue to work on this until or unless there is some reason for them not to, and that would be a government disclosure. And when people have UFO encounters, they need help. They just want somebody to tell them they're not crazy.
Officials at NASA and Bergstrom Air Force Base declined comment on the case. Betty and Vickie believe the U.S. government has lied to them about their involvement from the beginning.
They've ruined my health. They've ruined my life. So what else is there that they can do other than kill me? And they probably would love to do that. But I'm so stubborn and hard-headed that I'm going to show them I'm going to be around to fight just as long as there's a fight left in me.
Are Betty Cash and Vickie Landrum victims of a secret military program gone awry? Has a conspiracy hidden evidence of that fateful night in December 1980?
They took the case to court, and they lost in federal court. They could not prove that anything had happened to them that was a result of the government doing anything. I think they got carried away. Remember, there's something like 10% of all UFO reported cases are hoaxes. People fraudulently created this or report something that they know was not true.
The UFO investigators see too many coincidences in the case for it to be a fabrication.
Any kind of radiation can be mimicked by some other device, admittedly, but it's the combination of effects where you have multiple witnesses, eyewitness reports, substantiating other witnesses, plus the medical evidence in the case that took place at exactly the same time. This case had all of those things.
I believe that Betty Cash, Vickie Landrum encountered something. My gut feeling is that the government is involved in it up to their eyebrows. I think that we need to impress upon Uncle Sam to lay those cards down and let us have a look at them and let us evaluate that database.
Critics think the UFO community is looking for answers from the government which simply don't exist.
If not enough evidence is collected for people to do an objective analysis, no matter how much you think you've had an experience, no matter how strong your recollections, people aren't being cruel when they tell you we can't continue the investigation. They're being realistic. There's no more we can do.
Skeptics dispute the conspiracy theories that surround many UFO cases and claim the government has no reason to conceal the truth.
You can, after the fact, construct almost any event and make it look very strange and weird. The military, in my experience, does not lie about what it does. It's too concerned about its public relations image.
First of all, the government has every reason to lie. And second of all, the government does lie. There are tons of evidence where they've been caught with their hand in the proverbial cookie jar. The Alabama incident involving the black males that were subjected to testing, the GIs that were taken out into the desert in 1940s and 50s and subjected to atomic blast, and the government is turning their back. I would say to this gentleman that crap.